The stars had always been silent, and humanity had grown comfortable with that silence over the centuries that followed the great climate wars and the slow rebuilding of their wounded world. Commander Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the Luna station, watching Earth turn slowly below her like a blue and green marble wrapped in white clouds. She had spent 30 years in the Terran Defense Force and had never once expected to see what now filled her screens. The ships came through fold space like crystals being born from nothing, hundreds of them shimmering into existence above Earth in formation so perfect they looked like geometric art carved from starlight. Each vessel was larger than any human station, and they moved with the confidence of predators who had never known fear. "How many?" Sarah asked, her voice steady even as her heart raced. 412 capital ships, Lieutenant Park answered, his fingers trembling over his console, and approximately 2,000 smaller support craft. "We are picking up energy signatures unlike anything in our databases." Across the planet, alarms screamed to life. In New York and Beijing and Lagos and Mumbai, people stopped in the streets and looked up at the sky where strange lights now danced between the clouds. Children pointed and laughed, not understanding what those lights meant, while their parents felt ancient fears crawling up from the depths of their souls. The message came 3 hours later, broadcast on every frequency humanity had ever used, and several they had not even discovered yet. The face that appeared on every screen was not human. It belonged to a creature that resembled a praying mantis crossed with something noble and terrifying, with compound eyes that shimmered like opals and mandibles that clicked in precise patterns as it spoke. The translation came through perfectly, which meant these beings had been watching humanity long enough to learn their languages. "Children of Earth," the creature announced, its voice resonant and cold like wind through a frozen canyon. "I am Primarch Sethix Yuan of the Valkyrie Dominion. We have watched you from afar for many cycles of your sun, and now we return to claim what is rightfully ours." In the emergency bunker beneath Geneva, the United Terran Council watched in grim silence. President Martinez of the American Federation gripped the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Premier Jiang of the Eastern Coalition leaned forward with narrowed eyes. Chancellor Weber of the European Union whispered a prayer in German that her grandmother had taught her. The Primarch continued, his compound eyes reflecting strange colors that had no names in human tongues. 65 million of your years ago, the Valkyrie seeded this world with the building blocks of intelligent life. We planted the seeds that would one day grow into thinking creatures, servants designed to join our great dominion when the time was right. That time has now arrived. Sarah Chun felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was not first contact as humanity had imagined it, not a meeting of equals reaching across the void to shake hands in friendship. This was a farmer coming to harvest his crop. "You have a choice," Sethix Yuan declared, and his mandibles spread in what might have been a smile or might have been a threat. "Submit to the Valkyrie Dominion and serve us as you were designed to serve, and you will know peace and purpose under our guidance. Refuse, and we will cleanse this world and begin again with a more obedient seed. We have done this before, and we will not hesitate to do it again." The transmission ended, leaving humanity to stare at blank screens and wonder if this was how their story would end. President Martinez was the first to speak in the bunker, her voice cutting through the shocked silence like a knife through silk. "How long do we have?" General Okonkwo, the commander of Earth's unified defense forces, checked his tablet with hands that did not shake. He had served in the African resource wars 40 years ago, had seen cities burn and children starve, and he had learned long ago that panic was a luxury soldiers could not afford. "They are holding position in high orbit. Based on their formation, I would estimate they are waiting for our response before taking any military action. Then we respond," Premier Jiang said, standing from his seat. "We ask for time to deliberate. Every hour they give us is an hour we can use." Chancellor Weber nodded slowly, her mind racing through calculations of bunker capacity and evacuation routes and weapons, stockpiles that had gathered dust since the last human war. 72 hours, she suggested. It is a reasonable request for such a monumental decision. Even they must understand that. The request was sent, and to humanity's surprise, the Valkyrie granted it. Primarch Sethix Ewan appeared once more on their screens, his opal eyes gleaming with what humans would later learn was amusement. 72 of your hours, he agreed. We are patient, children of Earth. We have waited 65 million years, and we can wait 3 more days. Deliberate carefully and choose wisely. The transmission ended again, and for a moment the bunker was silent. Then President Martinez turned to General Okonkwo with fire burning in her eyes, and she asked the question that would change the course of galactic history. "General, what do we have?" Okonkwo smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other in increasingly creative ways. A species that had invented nuclear weapons and biological warfare and genocide. A species that had looked into the abyss of extinction by their own hands and had chosen to keep living anyway. "Madam President," he said, pulling up files that had been classified for decades, "we have everything. The Valkyrie think they are dealing with a primitive species that has never known real conflict. They have made a terrible mistake. Across the world, sleeper protocols activated. Defense platforms that had orbited silently since the climate wars powered up their reactors. Soldiers who had trained for enemies that walked on 2 legs and spoke human languages received new orders. Scientists who had theorized about weapons too terrible to build suddenly found themselves with government authorization. The Valkyrie watched from orbit, confident and patient, certain that these primitive creatures would see reason and submit. They had no idea that in bunkers and bases and secret facilities around the globe, humanity was not debating whether to surrender. They were debating which weapons to use first. Aboard the Valkyrie command ship Throne of Seeds, the analysts worked through the first night of the waiting period, their compound eyes scanning through centuries of human data with growing unease. Cathri was young for a Valkyrie officer, barely 300 cycles old. But he had risen quickly through the ranks because of his talent for understanding alien species. He had studied the seeded worlds of the Dominion, had helped pacify the gentle Morith and the timid Salassians, and he had never encountered anything that prepared him for what he now saw. "This cannot be correct," he muttered to himself, his mandibles clicking in distress as he reviewed the historical records. There must be an error in the translation matrices. But there was no error. The data was clear and terrible. He found records of something the humans called the First World War, a conflict that had consumed an entire generation of young men in mud and blood and poison gas. He found records of the Second World War that followed, where humans had built weapons that could split atoms and had used them on cities full of civilians. He found records of something called the Holocaust, where one group of humans had systematically murdered millions of another group simply because they were different. Catheri's secondary hands trembled as he scrolled through the data. The Valkyrie had conquered over 200 seeded worlds, and none of them had ever produced a species capable of such organized cruelty against their own kind. The Morith had surrendered after a single demonstration of Valkyrie power. The Salassians had welcomed the Dominion as gods. Even the proud Kithrani had recognized the futility of resistance within a single cycle. But these humans, these small, soft creatures with their fragile bodies and short lifespans, they had spent their entire history finding new ways to destroy each other. They had invented nuclear weapons and biological warfare and something called mutually assured destruction. A doctrine that promised total annihilation for both sides in any conflict. What kind of species developed a military strategy based on everyone dying? Kethri gathered his findings and requested an audience with Primarch Sethix Yuan. The old warrior received him in the observation chamber, where the blue curve of Earth filled the viewport like a jewel waiting to be claimed. "Speak, young one," the Primarch commanded, his opal eyes reflecting the planet below. "What have you learned about our new servants?" Kethri hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The Primarch was not known for his patience with bad news. "Primarch, I have studied the humans extensively, and I believe we may have underestimated them. Their history shows a pattern of violence unlike anything we have encountered in our other seeded worlds." Sethix Yuan made a sound that might have been laughter, a clicking of mandibles that echoed through the chamber. "Violence," he repeated. "Yes, we have observed their wars. It is precisely this aggression that proves they need our guidance. Left to themselves, they will destroy their own world." "With respect, Primarch, I do not think you understand," Kethri pressed on, knowing he was risking his position but unable to stay silent. "These creatures do not fight like animals competing for resources. They wage war with industrial efficiency. They build weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering. They have developed poisons that melt flesh and bombs that can level cities and diseases that can be spread through the air." The Primarch turned to face him fully, and Kethri felt the weight of those ancient eyes pressing down on him. "And yet they have never faced a true enemy," Sethix Yuan said dismissively. "They have only fought among themselves. When they see the power of the Valkyrie Dominion, they will understand their place in the natural order. This internal dysfunction you describe only confirms that they need our firm hand." Kethri wanted to argue further, but he recognized the dismissal in the Primarch's posture. He bowed and retreated, carrying his fears with him like stones in his chest. Far below, on the planet the Valkyrie thought they already owned, humanity was proving Kethri's fears justified in ways even he could not have imagined. General Okonkwo stood in the command center beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by screens showing military assets activating across the solar system. What he saw made him feel something he had not felt in decades: hope. "Report," he ordered. Colonel Vasquez stepped forward, her eyes bright with fierce energy. "The Luna batteries are online and charging. Mars Colony has activated their orbital defense grid. The asteroid mining stations are repositioning their mass drivers for combat operations. What about the sleeper platforms?" "Waking up now, sir. We have 47 weapons platforms that have been dormant since the resource wars. Most of them still have full ammunition stores." Okonkwo nodded slowly, running calculations in his head. "And the civilian population?" "Evacuation to deep bunkers is proceeding on schedule. We estimate 60% of the surface population will be underground within 48 hours. In orbit, the Valkyrie watched these movements with mild curiosity. They had seen primitive species prepare for resistance before, and it had never mattered. Their ships could glass continents, their soldiers could adapt to any environment, and their technology was millennia beyond anything these young creatures could possibly possess. They did not notice the small probes that humanity had launched into their formation. Devices no larger than a human fist that drifted silently between the crystalline ships, mapping their positions and scanning their systems. They did not notice the submarines rising from the ocean depths, each one carrying missiles that had been designed to end human civilization and were now being repurposed for a different enemy. They did not notice the way human communication networks had gone suddenly quiet, switching to frequencies and encryption methods that had been developed in secret and never used. When the 72 hours expired, Primarch Sethix Yuan opened the channel to Earth with the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. He expected groveling, or perhaps desperate bargaining. He expected the humans to beg for mercy, or offer tribute, or ask what terms of surrender might be available. Instead, The face that appeared on his screen was that of President Martinez, and her eyes held no fear at all. "Primarch Sethix Yuan," she said, her voice clear and cold as mountain ice. "The people of Earth have considered your offer carefully. We have debated and discussed and weighed our options." The Primarch spread his mandibles in anticipation. "And your decision?" Martinez smiled, and it was the smile of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and nuclear standoffs and climate collapse. A species that had stared death in the face so many times it had become an old friend. "No," she said simply. The Primarch's compound eyes flickered with confusion. "I do not think you understand your position." "Oh, we understand perfectly," Martinez interrupted, and behind her, screen showed targeting solutions locking onto the Valkyrie fleet. "You came here thinking you would find sheep waiting to be herded. Instead, you found wolves." "Then you have chosen extinction," Sethix Yuan declared, raising one claw to signal his fleet. "Have we?" Martinez asked, and her smile grew wider. "Check your fold space anchors, Primarch. Check them right now." Across the Valkyrie fleet, alarms began to scream. The fold space anchors that allowed their ships to escape into faster-than-light travel were offline, destroyed by weapons they had not even detected. They were trapped. And on Earth, humanity was just getting started. The first battle of the Solar War lasted exactly 17 minutes, and it rewrote everything the Valkyrie thought they knew about combat. Primarch Sethix Yuan had ordered his fleet to advance on Earth in the classic Dominion formation, a beautiful arrangement that had crushed 200 worlds before this one. The crystalline ships moved like dancers, their weapons charging with elegant precision. They never saw the asteroids coming. Human mining stations in the belt had been repositioning rocks for 3 days, using mass drivers to send chunks of iron and nickel hurtling toward the predicted path of any advancing fleet. These were not sophisticated weapons, just very large rocks moving very fast. But they hit the Valkyrie formation like the fist of an angry god. 12 ships shattered in the first wave. 19 more took critical damage. The beautiful formation scattered into chaos as captains tried to dodge debris moving at speeds their sensors could barely track. "Regroup," the Primarch commanded, his mandibles clicking with fury. "Launch fighters and establish a defensive perimeter. We will not be surprised again." But humanity was not finished surprising them. The second wave came from Earth itself, missiles launched from submarines and hidden silos, each one carrying warheads that had been designed to destroy human cities and were now aimed at alien spacecraft. The Valkyrie point defense systems were among the best in the galaxy, but they had been calibrated for energy weapons and plasma torpedoes, not for primitive rockets that simply exploded on impact. More ships died, and for the first time in centuries, the Valkyrie fleet knew fear. Kethri watched from the secondary command center as casualty reports flooded in. He had tried to warn them, had tried to explain that these humans were different, but no one had listened. "Ground assault," Admiral Vethrol ordered, her compound eyes burning with rage. "If we cannot crush them from orbit, we will crush them on the surface. Deploy the warrior caste." Dropships fell toward Earth like silver rain, each one carrying hundreds of Valkyrie soldiers bred for combat. They were faster than humans, stronger than humans, equipped with weapons that could cut through steel like paper. They had conquered worlds with half these numbers. They landed in North America first, targeting the military installations that their scans had identified. The first wave of warriors emerged from their ships with weapons ready, expecting terrified resistance from a primitive species. What they found was something else entirely. The humans did not meet them in open battle. Instead, they faded into the ruins of cities that had been evacuated days before. The streets were empty, the buildings silent, and the Valkyrie warriors advanced with growing unease. Then the first bomb exploded. It was buried under a street corner, triggered by pressure sensors that activated when enough weight passed over them. The blast tore through a squad of warriors and collapsed a building on top of the survivors. Before the dust cleared, gunfire erupted from a dozen windows, and then stopped just as suddenly as it started. The humans were gone before the Valkyrie could return fire. This pattern repeated across every landing zone. Ambush, retreat, ambush again. The humans fought from sewers and subway tunnels and basement hideouts. They planted traps in abandoned homes and rigged vehicles to explode. They struck without warning and vanished like ghosts. Kethri was assigned to command a ground unit after too many officers fell to sniper fire. He led his warriors through the ruins of a human city, stepping over the bodies of his fallen comrades and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. On the third day of the ground campaign, his unit captured a human soldier. The man was wounded, his leg torn by shrapnel, but he laughed as the Valkyrie dragged him before Kethri. "Why do you laugh?" Kethri demanded, his translator rendering the words in the human tongue. "You are defeated. Your city has fallen. Your people hide in holes like vermin." The human spat blood and grinned with red teeth. "Defeated?" He repeated, "Friend, we are just getting started. You think this is bad? You should read about Stalingrad sometime. You should read about the tunnels of Vietnam. You should read about every occupation that thought they could break us." "You cannot win," Kethri insisted. "Our technology is superior. Our numbers are greater. Submission is your only path to survival." The human laughed again, louder this time. "You really do not get it, do you?" he said, shaking his head. "We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We have perfected the art of killing. We have invented horrors your species cannot even imagine." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with something that made Kethri take a step backward. "You are not scary," the human whispered. "You are not even new. You are just another enemy, and we have buried enemies before." That night, the human escaped. Someone had planted explosives under the detention area, and in the chaos of the blast, he disappeared into the darkness along with 3 wounded comrades who should not have been able to walk. Reports came in from across the planet. Valkyrie positions overrun by guerrilla attacks. Supply lines cut by sabotage. Communication nodes destroyed by infiltrators who seemed to appear from nowhere. In space, the situation was no better. Human ships did not fight in formations, did not follow any tactical doctrine the Valkyrie recognized. They used asteroids as cover and ambushed convoys and rammed damaged ships into Valkyrie cruisers rather than allow themselves to be captured. When the Dominion forces finally captured a human space station near Mars, they found it empty except for a single message painted on the wall: "Goodbye." The station exploded 3 seconds later, taking 4 cruisers with it. Admiral Vethro finally convinced the Primarch to use their most powerful weapon, orbital bombardment. If they could not conquer Earth with soldiers, they would burn it clean and start fresh. The weapons charged, targeting a continent called Africa. One blast would kill hundreds of millions and demonstrate the futility of resistance. Then every Valkyrie ship received a transmission, and the weapons went silent. The message contained coordinates to a planet in the Valkyrie home system, and a simple statement that made the Primarch's blood run cold. "You shoot first, and we shoot last. Your homeworld is already targeted. The only question is whether your children will live to see the sunrise." The Valkyrie had made war on primitive species for millennia, but they had never faced an enemy willing to reach across the stars for revenge. They were beginning to understand what the word human really meant. Primarch Sethix Ewan stared at the coordinates on his screen and felt something he had not experienced in 5 centuries of conquest: genuine terror. How is this possible? He whispered, his mandibles barely moving. No seeded species has ever developed fold space technology. Our scientists assured us these humans were still centuries away from interstellar travel. Admiral Vethril stood beside him, her compound eyes dim with shock. Perhaps our scientists were wrong, Primarch. Perhaps we have been wrong about many things. The communication channel opened again, and this time the face that appeared was not President Martinez. It was an older woman in a naval uniform, her gray hair pulled back severely and her eyes carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much death to fear it anymore. "I am Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Defense Force," she announced, "and I believe we need to have an honest conversation about your situation, Primarch." Sethix Ewan forced his mandibles into a posture of authority that he no longer felt. "You threaten our homeworld, but you cannot possibly have weapons capable of reaching across such distances. This is a bluff, a desperate gamble by a species facing extinction." Admiral Tanaka smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Let me tell you a story," she said. 40 years ago, our scientists developed the theory of fold space travel. We understood the principles. We could have built the drives. Do you know why we did not? The Primarch did not answer, so she continued. We did not build them because we were still fighting each other. The climate wars had just ended, and we had nearly destroyed our own civilization. We looked at our history of violence and asked ourselves a question. What would happen if we brought that violence to the stars? She leaned forward, her eyes hard as diamond. We chose restraint, Primarch. We chose to heal our world before we reached for others. That was not weakness. That was wisdom. The fold space drives remained theoretical because we were not ready to be trusted with them. And now? Sethix, Ewan asked. Now you have given us a reason to be less careful. The Admiral touched a control, and new data appeared on the Valkyrie screens. Trajectory calculations, velocity readings, and estimated arrival times. When you first appeared in our system and demanded our surrender, we had 72 hours to respond. We used 12 of those hours to prepare our defenses, as you observed. What you did not observe was what we did with the other 60 hours. Kethri, watching from the secondary command center, felt his blood freeze as he processed the data. Primarch, he said, his voice barely audible, these are not fold space weapons. These are relativistic kill vehicles. Sublight missiles accelerated to 90% of light speed. Admiral Tanaka nodded. Very good, young one. You understand. We launched them before negotiations began, before we even knew if you would accept our request for time. They are currently traveling toward your homeworld at speeds your detection systems cannot track. Impossible, Admiral Vethril protested. Such weapons would take centuries to reach our space. 347 years, by our calculations, the Admiral confirmed. Your children will not see them coming. Your grandchildren will not see them coming. But your descendants will wake one day to find their sky on fire, and they will never know why. The Primarch's mandibles trembled. You would wage war across centuries? He demanded. You would plan revenge you will never live to see. We are human, Admiral Tanaka replied simply. We have been planning for futures we will never see since we first planted seeds and waited for harvests. We build cathedrals that take generations to complete. We write stories that will be read thousands of years after our deaths. Patience is not difficult for us. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the Valkyrie command. You came here expecting to find a young species, primitive and easily frightened. You found something else entirely. You found a species that has survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have driven us extinct. You found a species that nearly destroyed itself a dozen times and kept going anyway. You are monsters, Sethix Ewan whispered. Perhaps, the Admiral agreed. But we are monsters who learn from our mistakes. We carry the memory of every war we ever fought, every atrocity we ever committed, every horror we ever unleashed upon ourselves. That memory makes us very, very dangerous. Kethri thought of the wounded human soldier who had laughed in the face of capture. He thought of the space station crew who had chosen death over surrender. He thought of the guerrilla fighters who melted into shadows and struck from darkness. He finally understood what he was dealing with. These creatures had not evolved despite their violence. They had evolved because of it. Every war had made them harder. Every tragedy had taught them new lessons, and every near extinction had only strengthened their will to survive. They were not a young species at all. They were ancient in all the ways that mattered, tempered by 10,000 years of fire until they had become something terrible and beautiful and utterly unbreakable. The relativistic vehicles, the Primarch said slowly. Can they be recalled? Admiral Tanaka's expression did not change. Perhaps, perhaps not. Our scientists are debating that question even now. The vehicles are traveling at 90% of light speed, which makes communication difficult. They may respond to a recall signal, or they may not receive it in time, or they may be programmed to ignore it. You do not know if you can stop your own weapons. We built them in 72 hours, Primarch. We did not have time for elegant solutions. We only had time for effective ones. The silence that followed was heavier than the void between stars. Admiral Vethril leaned close to the Primarch and whispered urgently, "We cannot take this risk. If even one of those vehicles reaches the homeworld, millions will die. We must negotiate." Sethix Yuan turned his opal eyes toward Earth, that small blue world that had caused so much destruction to his grand fleet. He thought of the seeded worlds he had conquered, the gentle species that had submitted without resistance, the easy victories that had made him believe the universe was his to command. He had never imagined that a single planet could humble the Valkyrie Dominion. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice hollow with defeat. Admiral Tanaka did not smile in triumph. She did not gloat or mock. She simply nodded, as if this outcome had been inevitable from the beginning. "We want to talk," she said, "properly this time, as equals. We have terms to discuss, and I suggest you listen carefully." The Primarch bowed his head, and for the first time in the history of the Valkyrie Dominion, an invasion fleet prepared to negotiate with its intended prey. The humans had taught them something new. There were worse things in the universe than death. There was facing an enemy with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. The neutral station hung in the darkness between the two fleets, a small cylinder of metal and glass that had been hastily constructed for this moment. Inside its central chamber, the fate of two civilizations would be decided. Admiral Tanaka led the human delegation through the airlock, flanked by General Okonkwo and President Martinez. They wore no armor and carried no visible weapons, but their eyes held the quiet confidence of people who had already won. Primarch Sethix Yuan waited for them at the negotiating table, his compound eyes dull with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. Beside him stood Kethri, who had been promoted to senior advisor after so many officers had fallen to human tactics. The two groups faced each other across the polished surface, and for a long moment no one spoke. Finally, President Martinez broke the silence. "Primarch, I want to begin by saying that we take no pleasure in this situation. We did not ask for this war, and we did not want to fight it. And yet, you fought it with terrifying efficiency," Sethix Yuan replied. "You have killed thousands of my soldiers and destroyed dozens of my ships. Your weapons are even now traveling toward my homeworld. Do not pretend to be innocent victims." "We are not innocent," the president agreed. "We have never claimed to be innocent. Our hands have been bloody since the first human picked up a rock and struck another. But we have also learned, Primarch. We have learned what happens when violence has no limits. She placed a data tablet on the table between them. "These are our terms. They are not negotiable, but I think you will find them more generous than you might expect." Cathry reached for the tablet with trembling hands. He had expected demands for surrender, for tribute, for the kind of humiliation that the Valkyrie had inflicted on their conquered worlds. What he found surprised him. "You want us to leave your solar system," he read aloud. "You want us to broadcast to all species in the galaxy that Earth is not a seeded world subject to Valkyrie claim. You want access to our star charts and scientific databases. Is that all?" The Primarch asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Admiral Tanaka nodded. "In exchange, we will attempt to recall the relativistic vehicles. We make no guarantees of success, but we will try. And we will not pursue your fleet as it withdraws." The Primarch leaned back, his mandibles clicking in confusion. "I do not understand. You have us at your mercy. You could demand anything. You could destroy our fleet and leave our homeworld defenseless. Why show restraint?" The Admiral was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as if looking at something far away. "Because we have seen what happens when there is no restraint," she said finally. "We have burned our own cities and slaughtered our own children. We have built weapons capable of ending all life on our planet and pointed them at ourselves. We know what extinction looks like because we have stared into it a dozen times." She met the Primarch's compound eyes with a gaze that held centuries of sorrow. "We do not want to be the monsters we once were. We have spent generations trying to be better, trying to learn from our mistakes, trying to build a civilization worthy of the name. This war has shown us that we still have those old instincts, that we can still fight with the ferocity of our ancestors. Then why not use that ferocity?" Sethix Yuan demanded. "Why not crush us as we would have crushed you?" President Martinez answered this time, her voice soft but steady. "Because mercy is not weakness, Primarch. Mercy is the hardest thing there is. It takes more strength to spare an enemy than to destroy them. We know this because we have destroyed so many, and it has never made us safer or happier." She reached across the table and placed her hand near the Primarch's claw, not quite touching but close enough to bridge the gap. "We offer you peace, not because we cannot wage war, but because we have waged too much. We offer you survival, not because you deserve it, but because we need to prove to ourselves that we can be more than killers." The chamber was silent except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Cathry found himself moved by the humans' words. He had studied their history, had seen the depths of cruelty they were capable of, but he had also seen something else, a species that kept trying to be better, that kept reaching for ideals even when they fell short. "Primarch," he said quietly, "I believe they are sincere. I believe this is the best outcome we can hope for." Sethix Yuan looked at his young advisor, then at the humans who had humbled his great fleet with rocks and stubbornness and terrible, patient vengeance. "If I sign this agreement," he said slowly, "my name will be remembered as the Primarch who lost to primitives. My legacy will be one of shame." "Perhaps," Admiral Tanaka acknowledged, "or perhaps your name will be remembered as the Primarch who was wise enough to recognize an enemy that could not be defeated. There is no shame in survival, only in pointless destruction." The Primarch considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly he reached for the data tablet and pressed his claw to the signature pad. "It is done," he said. "The Valkyrie Dominion withdraws its claim to Earth. We will broadcast your independence to all species in the galaxy. We will share our knowledge with you." He paused, then asked the question that had been burning in him since the moment the first asteroids had struck his fleet. "Tell me one thing, Admiral. Why? Why fight so hard for this one small world? Why risk everything rather than submit?" Admiral Tanaka smiled, and for the first time it was a gentle smile, almost sad. "Because it is our home. she said simply, because our ancestors bled and died on that ground for 10,000 years. Because every mountain and river and ocean holds the memory of everyone we have ever loved. Because there are some things worth fighting for, even if you might lose. She stood and offered her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Welcome to the galaxy, Primarch. We hope you will learn to be better neighbors than conquerors. Sethix, Ewan took her hand carefully, feeling the strange warmth of human skin against his chitin. 1 week later, the Volcari fleet departed the Sol system, leaving behind the wreckage of their failed invasion and a newfound respect for the small blue world they had thought to claim. 1 month later, the broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy, a warning from the Volcari Dominion that Earth was not to be touched. That humanity was not prey, but predator, that any species foolish enough to threaten them would learn why the galaxy should fear creatures who had survived themselves. 1 year later, the first human ships equipped with fold space drives launched into the darkness, carrying explorers and diplomats and the eternal human hunger to see what lay beyond the next horizon. And on Earth, children looked up at the stars with wonder in their eyes, knowing they were not alone, knowing the universe was vast and strange and sometimes dangerous. They smiled, and the galaxy shivered, because humanity was coming, and they had so much to prove.